I'd like to start with kind of an embarrassing story. It's my second year of college and I'm at this party. And I see this girl across the room and she's pretty cute, so I go over there to talk to her. And we get to talking and it's going pretty well. And she asks what I major in. And I say public policy. And she looks at me in all seriousness and she asks me, "What is that?" And so that's me there. I guess there were two girls. So I start explaining it to her a little too seriously. And I realized that I'm at this party at 12 o'clock in the morning talking to a girl about how the government does cost-benefit analyses. And I realized that at that moment, in the spirit of Dos Equis, I am the least interesting man in the entire world. But this is what we worry about, right, with young people, that we're the dumbest generation, that we don't know what public policy is. And if it's true, it's bad for our democracy and for me because girls don't give me their phone number. And so one of the things that we have to grapple with is, how true is that? And we see a lot of statistics that suggest it's true. Like, more young people can name members of the Simpsons family than First Amendment freedoms, or more Supreme Court, or more American Idol judges than Supreme Court justices, or more sex positions than senators, or whatever. And I question the extent to which those kind of trivia things matter, but it's true that we all ought to know more about the world around us, young people in particular. And we know that young people can consume serious topics when they're presented in an adult way, as Sesame Street demonstrates. And, so the question is, how do we get to that place? And I became very interested in this question of, are young people getting news? Because we hear often that they're not. And so I did a year-long research project on this topic. And there are three things that I think are really important to why more young people aren't getting the news and maybe suggest some answers for us. One of those is the assumptions that we make about young people. And then the other two are about the quality of our news and the way it's delivered. And the first is really interesting. It's about this division that we enforce between youth and adulthood. We're really preoccupied with it. There's a New York Times article that came out recently that covered this topic. It's called "What Is It About 20-Somethings?" And it was asking the question, why is it taking young people so long to grow up? And there were some good points in it, but it came off as incredibly patronizing to most people who were under 30. And on the internet, you had all these responses and feedbacks that were sort of expressing that feeling. And it was a great example of this sort of outside-looking-in perspective we take with youth that reminds me so much of a zoo, where we sort of all gather around and look for an image that doesn't necessarily match reality. And it happens to all sorts of groups, but it's particularly interesting when we think about youth, because we're worried about our future. We're worried about, as this survey shows that the Higher Education Research Institute does, are young people more interested in being well off financially or developing a meaningful philosophy of life? And you can see over the past 20 years that it's changed more towards being well off financially. And it concerns some people, but if you look at the data, it shows the recession is really what's to blame in the early 80s and in this decade. The point is that it's kind of difficult to ask young people to stay involved in a system that gets them wrong a lot and that sometimes seems like it's not very interested in them. And part of this is about how we look at news. We sort of think of two kinds of news. There's the boring but really serious stuff, like the minutes of a city hall meeting or something, and then the chocolate cake, the fluffy stuff, like updates about Lindsay Lohan going to rehab. And we implore young people to read more of the former, to get the serious stuff, to eat their vegetables. But a lot of specialty publications that reach out to youth are only providing the sugary stuff. And I think the question is not about that. The question for us as a society, and if you're involved in news media, is how do you make the vegetables interesting? How do you turn the serious stuff into something that's accessible and engaging for young people? And it's absolutely possible, as the salad demonstrates, to make the vegetables tasty. Part of the problem, though, in doing that is that our habits are changing. This baby is every newspaper executive's dream, but it looks less and less like the reality we're going to have. Every survey that comes out shows fewer and fewer young people are reading the newspaper on a regular basis. And that's not all bad, but it does mean that this format that worked for many years is no longer available to us. This is a lot more like the future we're going to have. News is social. People are connecting on Facebook and by email and verbally as they always have. Search engines are a big thing, and it's a hard transition for traditional news organizations that are used to an old way of doing business. New York Times is a great example of that, and I pick on them here not because they're the worst, but because they're among the best. Look at this website and how much is going on this page. And imagine being a teenager with not a lot of experience on these topics, trying to understand what's going on. We don't give a lot of road signs for people in news media. And young people report this in surveys. They find it very overwhelming. So to help you imagine that, I've changed the news to news from a top entomology journal about the study of insects. And I'd like you to take the next few seconds to try and understand what's going on, since most of you know nothing about entomology. Raise your hand if you're an entomologist. Nice. Oh, one guy. Okay, you can't play. Everybody else try and figure out what's going on. It's hard, right? The point is that people need better tools on the web, and it's kind of counterintuitive, but to help them get less information and not more, because it can be very overwhelming. And great ideas come from Amazon, which gets to know you and suggests other books about how dumb I am. Or Wikipedia, which helps me break down complex topics into manageable bits, but isn't reliable. What if news organizations did it? And the final thing is about how we cover young people. If you're from this area, you may remember this article done about UNC last year about the male-to-female ratio. And this reporter came down and did some interviews around campus and came away with this perspective that made UNC girls look absolutely desperate for boyfriends. They let guys cheat on them, they were absolutely desperate. And a lot of people said, there were almost riots on campus, and a lot of people said, why not hire a young person to do that story or to do a companion piece? And so the issue here that I'm trying to get at is not that if we don't address some of these questions, our democracy is going to explode into 300 million little nation states. The issue is much smaller. You know, it's about what kind of future do we want? How do we want people to approach the small issues that we face every day when they have a kid or when a president tries to reform healthcare? And I get so excited about this because I see this future where we are more informed and engaged like this and online, and some of the steps are so easy to get us to that world where, you know, we're engaged and where girls give me their phone number. And I think we all want that world. So these are just some thoughts about how to get there. Thank you.